Welcome to the Relational Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today, we're talking about accountability. So we hope the conversation's helpful. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Wes, how you doing?
Doing well. Today, I want to talk about accountability. I was hanging out with, I sat in on a group meeting with some of the refuge guys recently, and it was really helpful. It was really insightful. One of the things that came up was how we talk about accountability, which, it reminded me that this is it's a complicated thing. The idea of accountability is really complicated, and there was definitely some confusion and some frustration around. I remember one guy said something to the effect of like, if I show up 3 minutes late to a meeting, like I don't want somebody harping on me about it, like in front of everybody, and that being called accountability. And so it just reminded me that like the question was like, some of the questions that came through my head were like, what are we talking about when we're talking about accountability? What does this word mean? What does it look like, and how are we supposed to do it well? So I just figured we could give like a really brief flyover in our opinion as to what it means and how we might try to do it well. I wanted to set this up first, though, by just going to the Bible in 1 Thessalonians 5:11. It says, "Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up, just as you were doing." The reason I bring that up, the word accountability isn't in there, but accountability in its essence is aimed at building one another up. And I think sometimes because we bring our baggage into relationships, we tend to view accountability as an opportunity to beat somebody down.
Point out their flaws.
Yeah, point out their flaws just for the sake of pointing out their flaws. So just to set this up, when we're talking about accountability at the refuge, none of us do this perfectly, myself included, not even close. But our aim should be the betterment, the flourishing, the good for the other person. If we're ever approaching a conversation and calling it accountability, and the emotions that are coming up within us are bitterness, resentment, anger, frustration, those kinds of things, not the fruit of the Spirit, as Paul writes about in Galatians 5. Like, if those things are coming up, then we shouldn't engage. We should shut up. Because the aim of accountability is for the good of the other person. So an example might be, I won't get too specific, but this happens a lot in my life. And, I had a friend recently who was dealing with some issues in his family and his life. And like, I pressed in, like I asked him some hard questions, but I genuinely, I didn't, and again, I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, or I'm just trying to give an example. I love this guy. He's one of my closest friends. And we have a relationship, a friendship, to the extent that, he has full freedom to speak into my life, and he's given me freedom to speak in his. And I asked him some hard pointed questions because I want good for him. Like, I want his marriage to flourish. I want his life to be good. I want good for him. I don't want to humiliate him. I don't want to harm him. I don't want ill will towards him. And so I asked these hard questions, and I pushed him hard, not because I was trying to be self-righteous or a jerk. I wanted him to be good and healthy, and I wanted to do whatever I could to support him in that way. And so when I say that the goal of accountability is to encourage and build one another up, that doesn't mean we don't say hard things. That doesn't mean that the truth isn't going to hurt sometimes. But what it does mean is when I say something that might hurt, or when I say something that might be hard, if I can't do that from a place of love for the other person, then I am in the wrong. In other words, if I can't say it with love for the other person, then I shouldn't say it.
Yeah, and I think we've all personally experienced someone holding us accountable, and we've experienced as not loving, or we experienced it as an attack. Like it's an attack on my character, attack on my identity. And then they hide behind this fake, I'm just holding you accountable because don't you want me to hold you accountable so you can be a better person? Like so it is a complicated thing. And like when you said the fruits of the Spirit, if you feel the urge to hold someone, like there's a kind of usually two types of people. The people who hold people accountable, like it's like that's their spiritual gift, is holding people accountable, also known as criticism. If that's your spiritual gift, like you just find everything wrong in people, that's not accountability. That's just criticism.
No, exactly.
When it becomes when you're holding someone accountable, it's because you see a better version of that person, or you know that who that person can be, and you're holding them to the standard that they've identified. And it gets really messy when we try to hold somebody else to a different standard than they want. That's why being clear about like what our standards are with each other. Because like if you try, like here's an example for a refuge guy. If you go to work on a job site and try to hold somebody accountable for like cussing who's not in the refuge or who isn't even a believer, like that doesn't make any sense at all, because it's not a standard they care about, this other person. If they don't see the value in not cussing, why even hold them accountable? Because they don't see the value in it. Accountability, you have to have this shared understanding of what the standard is. And then we're holding each other accountable to the standard. Not to like, I think life should be this way and I'm going to hold everybody to my opinion. That's not accountability.
Yeah, you're so right. And I mean, the reason that we do it at the refuge is because there's an agreed upon expectation that everyone who's in the refuge is in the refuge for a similar purpose and a similar aim. And so there's an agreed upon expectation that you're going to hold each other to a similar behavioral expectation. But to your point, that doesn't exist out in the world in many places. So
with strangers.
Yeah. So we're not to go around and hold strangers accountable for things. I mean, obviously, unless they're putting someone's in harm's way, but I'm not going to fixate on the extreme examples here. By and large, you're absolutely right. That's why we're not going to hold people that we don't know accountable, because they may have a different worldview in a different way they want to live their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's really hard if you think about it from that way. Like if we use the example of like, I'm going to hold somebody accountable for being late, 3 minutes late to a group, right? If I'm wanting to hold, like, so let Wes, if you were 3 minutes late to a group and my intention is to point out, it's like, oh, he messed up. I want everyone to know he messed up. And it's like, that's not holding you accountable. It would be if we all knew like, hey, it starts at 12:30. We all agree that being on time is a way that we as a group show respect to each other by being on time, because I'm putting everybody else's priorities and time on a level playing field as mine. So I'm not going to make somebody wait for me because of my poor planning. So that is an agreement that we have together. That's why time is so important. That's why dinner starts at, it was 5. I can't remember if it's 5 or 5:30 in Columbus, but the time, like, it starts at the same time and everybody needs to get there, because that is how we have agreed to show respect to each other. So when someone's late, it's understood that it's not showing respect. It's disrespectful to be late in the refuge. And we've agreed to that. And we know that. So we can hold each other accountable to it, because nobody it's agreed upon that no one wants to be disrespectful. Like, I don't want to be disrespectful to the guys around me. So if I show up late, I know that I am being disrespectful to somebody else. And if nobody holds me accountable to that, then it's like, well, I guess, maybe I am more important than everybody else, or maybe it isn't as big of a deal that other people's time, I shouldn't care or value about other people's time. That's not loving to me if I show up late. So there's an expectation of holding me accountable for being late because they love me, not because I'm a bad person or they're attacking my character. It's an action that needs to be addressed, not a character flaw. And we often take the behaviors that we need to adjust personally, like it's a character, like someone sees it as a character flaw.
Yeah, because you're late, you're a bad person.
Right. That doesn't equate.
I like the time example though, because it brings up several things. I want to look at a couple of them. Like, plans do change, and I think that, like, when it comes to, like, holding people accountable, like, and showing people respect, and just use time as an example, like, we've got to learn, like, holding each other accountable. Like, communication plays a big role in that, because we're using words to confront people about the behavior. And it's like, if you're going to show up late, you could communicate that to someone. Like today, like, I asked you if we could start later because I hadn't ate all day, and I was a lot hungrier than I thought I would be. And I didn't want to come to this and be half out of it because I was feeling kind of sick. And you were kind enough to say, yeah, no big deal. So instead of just not showing up on time and, like, you waiting around wondering where I am, I asked you, and I let you know, and, like, we figured it out. So it's like, can we show each other courtesy, not only when we confront each other, but can we show each other courtesy if plans change, or give people the benefit of the doubt? Another thing I wanted to bring up is really what we're looking for in a lot of behaviors are patterns. And I really want anyone who's listening to, if there's one thing that I want you to hear, like, patterns are what you're looking for. Patterns of behavior. Human beings are habitual beings, meaning we are habit-forming creatures. Okay? We tend to, that's why when I bet you when you walk into the upper transpo in Lancaster, you go to the same seat. And if you don't, you're different, because most people create habits without even realizing they're doing it.
Yeah. Or that's your pattern to not sit in the same seat.
Yeah. Or that's your pattern to not sit in the same. Exactly. But we are habit forming creatures. So why do I bring this up? I bring this up because we're looking for patterns. If Austin, if you're late every once in a while, it really isn't that big of a deal. Okay? Life happens, things happen. If you're late every meeting, what is that? It's a pattern. That's a problem.
Oh, it's bad. Yeah, it's a problem, because it shows, like, time management issues or communication issues. Because I was like, man, I was habitually late to stuff all the time. And then I realized I should probably just adjust my schedule to fit the life that I actually have. I mean, there was a Monday meeting that I used to have with coordinators in Columbus that I was late to every single time. Then I was like, because I can't get from one part of town to the west side in the time that I had given myself. And lo and behold, I could just communicate that with the team and say, like, hey, can we start this 30 minutes later? Because then I can get there. There's 15 minutes. Instead of being 15 minutes late, I can get there 15 minutes before it starts and be prepared for the day, and nobody's wasted their time. That's a communication flaw. Not in, like, I beat myself up about, like, man, I'm like, any guy who's on staff at the refuge that worked with me, the statement is like, oh, Austin's on Broad Street. He's going to be late. So it was my lack of communication, not a character flaw. Because I was trying to be something that I couldn't. I was trying to fit an expectation that wasn't realistic. And it was one that guys didn't really care about. They did care that I was late. They're like, what's going on, man? Because it's a big deal to a lot of people. You're never late. And I just needed to communicate instead of like making somebody upset. Like, oh gosh, if I move this schedule, they might be upset. I could just move the schedule, be on time every single time, and then no one is upset. So that's an example of a communication flaw. And Jordan Fillmore is the one who held me accountable to it again and again and again. And Tom Meyer was a part of that also. And all I had to do was change a time, but we wouldn't have come to that unless we talked to each other.
So we're looking for patterns, and that's a great example. Because, somebody said it in the group, and I think it was a really good point. When we're not, it was something to the effect of, when we're not faithful with little things, when we cut corners in small areas, listen, we tend to cut corners in big areas.
Mm-hmm.
So when we notice a pattern of missing the mark in small things, you can almost assume that person is letting things slip in bigger things. So again, going back to the time thing, it's a good example because it seems so trivial. But if you're always late, that is a problem. Like, I'm not going to lie, for someone listening or whatever, like if I was late all the time, I would want somebody to tell me. And trust me, Ben Reynolds would, because time matters to him and it matters to me. I mean, I was raised on time is 10 minutes early. Out of respect for other people. And I'm not saying I always do that, but I'm saying that's always kind of in the back of my head. And so we're looking for patterns. So I guess practically, what does that mean? That means if you notice something in a close friend or in yourself, or to use the refuge, another resident in the ministry, if you notice a behavior that seems not that big of a deal, okay, well, let's not be petty. If it's an isolated incident and this person never does that and they just did it once, well, maybe like be a little patient with them, But if it's a behavior that's reoccurring, that's a problem. Poor behavioral patterns are problems.
What do you mean by core behavioral patterns?
I just said poor behavioral patterns.
Poor behavioral. Yeah, okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, I think a good if you're wondering, it's like, should I hold this person accountable to this? Like, I would ask yourself, if every hill is a hill to die on, there's not like that's not something that's realistic. It's also like, if everything is a 10 or everything is important, then nothing is important. What makes something important is there's not many things that are really important. So that means that there are some things that we really need to have a high standard that's consistent because it's important. Some things are not as important. And and why that gets complicated is because you and I, Wes, we'll just use you and I. You and I are very different people. What's really important to me and what's really important to you is usually pretty different. But what's really important to both of us is how we lead in the refuge. And we agree on those things. And these are the standards that we have for how we operate. So it's what we share, what the shared importance of things. That's where we're trying to gauge what we hold each other accountable to.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what Luke says in Luke 17:3 in the Gospels, where he says, "Pay attention to yourselves!" ! If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. Very straightforward, very hard to do. But I love the first sentence: pay attention to yourselves. I was reminded of that when you were talking, Austin, because it's like where I thought you were going to go is if you're dying on every hill, it's like, do you want people to die on every hill with you? It goes back to kind of the golden rule of treat other people the way that you want to be treated. Okay? Now listen, if you're saying, well, then I won't hold anybody accountable because I don't want to be held accountable. Well, guess what? That's a recipe for being a fool. So if you want to just do silly things and no one find out about it, then you're going to end up in a ditch somewhere. But we definitely don't want to go to the other extreme either, which is to nitpick about every single thing, because as we've already said, that's not helpful. So we really need to look in the mirror. As Luke says, we need to pay attention to ourselves. We need to make sure that we're taking our own issues seriously before we're pointing out, or definitely as we're pointing out others. If we're pointing out others' issues and we're never looking at ourselves, well, then that's a major problem. That's a major problem. In other words, we better be looking in the mirror as we're aiming to hold others accountable.
Yeah. And I think it's also fair to like acknowledge that usually the people who are incredibly critical of others are most critical to themselves. And it can be confusing for people who have been identified or been accused of being overly critical. Like a good trick is share how like you are messing up and how you're working on things, or here's a better one. Ask someone for help for that, because nobody can stand someone who is, acts like they have everything under control, or like they know everything, or nobody can teach them anything. So they grace us with their presence to hold us all accountable because they've figured out their life. Like that's not real. And nobody like wants to be around that type of person. So the person where you find yourself like, man, I just see things so much faster and like a better way to do it. Like use your words and explain why. Like ask for help in the areas that you struggle in, because if you're really critical, the areas you struggle in. And a way to connect with somebody is to share your struggles and share the things that are challenging you instead of only pointing out other people's challenges, because that's a great way to isolate yourself.
Yes. Yeah. So to kind of end where we started, the writer of Hebrews, this is in chapter 10, verse 24, he says, "Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more." Again, all of this is in service of stirring up one another towards love and good works. In other words, when you go to confront your brother, how can you do that in a way that is pushing them and stirring them towards love and good works? Because that's the aim. That's the aim. To want good for ourselves, but to equally want good for those around us. And the insidious thing about addiction, and we all struggle with addiction to some degree, so I'm not saying that like I'm excluded. The insidious thing about the depths of addiction, though, is it's so self-absorbed. The essence of addiction is that one's perspective and gaze is strictly on themselves. And I think evil traffics there, because what a great place to have somebody be miserable, but also to be miserable to those around them. Because a self-absorbed person is not a pleasant person to be around. So the invitation is to community. And so if we approach accountability as an isolated know-it-all, like you were talking about, Austin, we're going to do more harm than good. The invitation is community, and accountability, instead of just doing it to point out people's wrongs, it's pointing out things that could cause that person harm. Like if I keep showing up late to every meeting, guess what? I'm going to lose respect. I could lose my job. I could, the people that never are where they're supposed to be don't tend to do well in our society. So if I was doing that all the time, I would hope that somebody would love me enough to challenge me to grow in that area, because they're stirring me towards good works for my own good, because they love me. That's what I think this should look like. So I don't know. Any other thoughts to kind of bring it to a close, man?
Oh no, I think it's great that we talked about the fruits of the Spirit as like that should be the foundation of why we have the motivation to hold someone accountable is based in those things, based in the fruit of the Spirit. So and there's a lot of them because I think it's nice that there are a lot of those fruits because we all are a little bit different and some of them are a little bit, they're more like they impact us a little bit more each differently. So asking yourself is the way, if I'm gonna hold this person accountable, can I do it with self-control? If I can't, I probably need to pause and wait until I can. Or if I can't say this in a kind way or a gentle way, because if we can't do it in a way that is loving and can be experienced as loving, we need to take the time to like figure out how we do that. Like that is the self-discipline of figuring out how do I hold someone accountable well. So it has to be rooted in those things. It can't be about I'm going to show this person or I'm going to hurt this person or I'm going to like knock them down a notch, because that's not based in love. That's based in pride and ego, and that doesn't or being a know-it-all. Like that doesn't breed community. That's a good way to isolate yourself or get kicked out of a community. So notice I said you have to hold people accountable.
Yeah, it reminds me of people that are preoccupied with being right. Well, that's not right. This is right. It's like, well, just because you're right, even if you are right, it doesn't mean that you can be a jerk.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you can be right by yourself, all alone. How's that?
So even if you feel that you're doing the right thing and you're doing the right way and you're just trying to point it out, we've got to say the right thing in the right way. And according to Christ, the right way is love. It's love.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And love is not fearful. Love isn't a coward. Love is difficult. So this isn't about being like, I don't want anyone to hear, especially as a bunch of guys at the refuge. It's like, oh, I need to be gentle and kind. That takes a lot of courage because you can say something that's difficult in a kind way that'll push someone to grow, that'll really piss somebody off. It's not about like changing the way you say so nothing gets across. It's saying something that's true. It's not about being, it's about being more true, not about being less honest or like, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Like sometimes the truth hurts. It's about not harming someone intentionally. So it's being more true with what you're saying.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.